Mark starts with a command tower, then he casts Wild Tracker and pass. Jeff plays a Lush Portico, he surveils a plains to the graveyard and pass. Will plays a Flooded Strand, he cracks it and fetches Rafine's Tower into play tapped. Adam plays Exotic Orchard and pass. Mark plays a Swamp, he sends Ulvenwald at Jeff for 1 damage and pass. Jeff plays Amulet of Vigor, then he plays Radiant Grove and pass. Will plays Reflecting Pool, then he casts Lotho Corrupt Sheriff. Adam plays Flooded Grove, then he casts Soul Ring. After that, he casts Gwenna Eyes of Gaia. He can tap it for 2 mana and it untaps when he casts Big Creatures. That second spell triggers Lotho and Will gets a treasure. Mark plays another Swamp, then he casts Triumph of Ferocity and pass. Jeff plays Scattered Groves and he sends the turn over to Will. Will plays Bloodstained Mire, he cracks it and fetches for Xander's Lounge. Moving to combat, he sends 2 damage at Jeff, unblocked, and pass. Adam plays Lightning Greaves, then he plays Yavimaya Coast. After that, he casts O'Hare Chasm Deepest Growth, looking to cheat some big creatures into play with his combat damage trigger. He equips Lightning Greaves to his god, and Lotho makes Will another treasure. He moves to combat and sends O'Hare Chasm at Mark, unblocked. Mark takes 6 damage and Adam reveals an island, Apex Devastator, Infernal Titan, 3 visits, Cascade Bluffs, and Cryptic Command. He chooses to put Infernal Titan into play for his creature and the Cascade Bluffs as his land from the O'Hare Chasm's trigger. With Infernal Titan's ETB, he kills Will's Lotho. Then he remembers to untap Gwenna and pass the turn. Mark plays Llanowar Wastes, then he casts Reclamation Sage. On ETB, he destroys Adam's Soul Ring. Jeff casts Hour of Revelation. Will responds by floating 2 black mana. Then all non-land permanents gets destroyed. From there, he plays a forest. Before he changes phases, Will flashes in Orcish Bowmasters. On ETB, Will gets an army and deals 1 damage to Adam. Will starts his turn by playing an island. Moving to combat, he sends 1 damage at both Mark and Adam and pass. Adam casts Goreclaw Terror of Kalsisma and passes, missing his land drop this turn. Mark casts Greater Good, he'll pass, also missing his land drop. Jeff starts by casting Harmonize, drawing himself 3 cards. Orcish Bowmaster triggers, dealing 3 damage to Goreclaw and pumping up the army. Then Jeff plays a Plains and pass. Will plays a Swamp. Then he casts Karazakar the Eye Tyrant, letting him gold his opponent's creatures once they actually have some on the board. He moves to combat, sending the 4/4 Orc army at Jeff and the Bowmaster at Adam. Adam casts Monstrous Vortex, letting him discover whenever he casts big creatures. Mark untaps, draws, and passes. Really unlucky with the missed lands. Jeff casts his commander, Karametra, God of Harvests. Then he plays a forest and pass. Will plays a tapped Godless Shrine. He sends the 3/5 Karazakar at Adam, the 4/4 army at Jeff, and the Bowmaster at Mark, all with no blocks, and he passes the turn. Adam draws and passes. Mark casts Read the Bones, keeping both on top and drawing 2 cards. Will sends the Bowmaster damage at Jeff. Mark gets his land, playing a forest for turn and passing. Jeff casts Vorinclex. Karametra triggers, so he puts Arctic Treeline into play. With Vorinclex's ETB, he gets Canopy Vista and a forest. He plays the Canopy Vista as his land for turn, then he passes after discarding down a hand size. Will plays Arid Mesa, he cracks it for basic plains. Moving to combat, he sends Karazakar at Jeff, tapping and golding Vorinclex, with the army going to Adam, and the Bowmaster going at Mark. Mark responds to attacks by casting Assassin's Trophy targeting Orcish Bowmasters. Will searches for a basic island into play, and everyone takes their damage. After that, Will casts one of his commanders, Ishai Ojatai Dragon Speaker. Adam responds by casting Mystical Tutor. He searches for a Sky Shroud claim to the top of his library. From there, Will passes the turn. Adam casts the Sky Shroud claim he tutored for. That triggers Ishai for a counter. Adam grabs Ketria Triome and Cinderglade into play and pass the turn. Mark plays a Rogue's Passage. Then he casts his commander, Yargle and Multani, and he'll pass. Will gets a counter on Ishai, and Jeff starts his turn. Jeff pays 8 to exile Vorinclex, returning it as the Grand Evolution. He mills 10 cards on ETB. He returns Nissa Vastwood Seer to the battlefield, and he returns Nissa Resurgent Animist to the battlefield. Then Nissa Vastwood Seer lets him search for a basic forest to his hand, which he puts into play, triggering Nissa Vastwood Seer to transform into Nissa Sage Animist. He also floats a white mana with Nissa Resurgent Animist landfall ability. Then he uses Nissa's +1 ability. revealing a Maria Shepherd and putting it into his hand. After that, he evokes Solitude. Ishai gets a counter. Karametra triggers, so Jeff fetches a plains into play tapped. The land entering triggers Nissa Resurgent Animist, and he reveals a Wood Elves to hand. With Solitude's ETB, Jeff chooses to exile Will's Ishai. After that, he casts the Wood Elves. He gets a plains from Karametra's trigger and a forest from Wood Elves. Then he casts Farhaven Elf. With that, he gets a plains and he gets a forest. Then he passes the turn over to Will. Will starts by attacking Nissa Planeswalker with his 5/5 Karazakar. He taps and goads the creature Nissa on attack. He also sends the Orc Army. Jeff blocks both with his 1/1 Elves. Will moves through main phase and passes the turn. Adam casts Selvala Stampede. Adam himself votes Wild. Mark votes Free. Jeff votes Free. Will also votes Free. From his hand, Adam puts the Skull Spore Nexus into play. Then he puts Vaultborn Tyrant into play. Without a third free card, he flips Emoti Celebrant of Bounty into play with his Wild Vote. Vaultborn has an ETB, so he gains 3 life and draws a card and passes. Mark casts Haunted Cloak. Then he equips it to his commander, giving him Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. After that, he moves to combat and sends his commander at Jeff for 18 unblocked damage. On attack, he and Will draw a card and lose a life thanks to Karazakar. Before damage, Mark casts Giant Growth, making Jeff take a clean 21 commander damage, taking him out of the game, and he passes. Will plays Luxury Suite. Moving to combat, he sends Karazakar at Mark, tapping and goading Yargle and Multani. Then he passes the turn. Adam casts Courser of Krufix. Then he moves to combat, sending the 6/6 Vaultborn Tyrant at Will with no blocks, and he passes after that. Mark plays a forest. Then he casts Skyshroud Claim. He fetches 2 forests into play, untapped. Moving to combat, he sends his commander at Adam. He and Will draw and lose 1 life. Adam blocks with Emoti, taking 17 commander damage. Then Mark casts Beast Within, targeting Karazakar. Adam gets a 3/3 fungus from the Skullspore Nexus. During Mark's end step, Will casts Mirror Weave, targeting his Orc Army. In response to that, Mark casts Feign Death, targeting Yargle and Multani. Then he sacrifices Yargle and Multani to greater good, drawing 18 cards. It will return to play and become a 0/0, but it'll have a +1/+1 counter thanks to Feign Death. Every other creature becomes a 0/0 Orc Army with no counters, so they all die. When Vaultborn Tyrant dies, Adam gets a token copy of it. Mark moves to his end step and discards a lot of cards. Will plays a swamp. Then he sends his 6/6 army at Mark, unblocked. After that, he casts Queen Marchesa. He becomes the Monarch. He moves to end step, drawing from Monarch. At his end step, Adam mountain cycles Oliphant. Adam starts his turn by casting Nature's Lore. He shocks in a breeding pool. Moving to combat, he sends Vaultborn Tyrant at Will. Will blocks it with his Queen Marchesa. Both creatures die. Adam dealt 3 trample damage, so he becomes the Monarch. Then he plays a forest and draws a card at his end step because he's the Monarch. Mark plays a swamp. He moves to combat and sends Yargle and Multani at Will. In response to that, Adam taps the Skullspore Nexus to double its power. Will responds by casting Comeuppance, which would prevent that 38 damage and deal that much damage to Yargle and Multani. Mark responds by casting Hero. He sacrifices a forest, then he puts 2 swamps into play. After that, he casts Malakir Rebirth, then he sacrifices Yargle and Multani to draw 39 cards with greater good. He discards 3 swamps. During his second main phase, he equips Yargle and Multani with the cloak. Then he casts Ram Through, dealing 9 damage to Will's army and 9 damage to Will. Because of Comeuppance, I think that 9 damage should have been prevented and dealt to Yargle, but we missed that during this game. After that, he casts Essence Harvest, targeting Will. Will loses 18 life, and Mark gains 18 life, knocking Will out notably with an asterisk. Mark moves to his end step and discards. Adam casts his commander, Maelstrom Wanderer. Monstrous Vortex triggers, and he discovers 8. He casts Ronus the Indomitable from that. Monstrous Vortex triggers again. He discovers 3. He casts 3 visits. He shocks in the Stomping Ground. Then he starts his commander's 2 cascade triggers. His first hit is an Itali Primal Storm, which triggers Monstrous Vortex. He discovers Guardian Project. With his final cascade, he casts Wayford Sawtooth, which triggers Monstrous Vortex again. He discovers 3 and casts Cultivate. He puts a mountain into play and a forest into his hand. With that, he draws from Guardian Project. Then he plays a forest. Then he casts Gulta Primal Hunger, triggering Guardian Project to draw a card, and triggering Monstrous Vortex to discover 12. He casts Arcane Signet. Then, moving to combat, he sends the team at mark for 35 unblocked damage to take the game. As a big congratulations to Adam for that spike play at the end. Hope everybody enjoyed the gameplay. Till next time, I'll see you at the table.